What up, guys, gals, non-binary pals? Yes, anyway, hi, welcome. Yes, this is chapter 5 of unit 3. We're going to continue talking about land-based empires, and today we're going to continue by looking at two land-based empires in particular. We're going to look at the Mughals, and then we're going to look at the Safavids. So the AP really wants you to know about 5 land-based empires in the period between 1450 and 1750. We've got the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, the Qing dynasty in China, or the Manchu dynasty as it's sometimes called, and then, Russia as well. And of course, as I mentioned in the previous video, yes, we will talk about the Qing dynasty more in Unit 4, but we are going to cover the Safavid and Mughals today. So bell work on the screen, but we're going to get started. Oh my God. So yes, here we go. Let's talk about the Safavids and the Mughals. And the lesson objective today is actually very similar to the lesson objective for the first 2 chapters, talking about that idea of continuity and change in systems of beliefs. And remember, systems of belief is a broad term. It mostly means religion, but as we explored in chapter 2, it could also be about philosophy as well. So yes, we are going to look at continuity and change in religion today. So pay attention to examples of religious continuity and religious change. Change is the easiest one to always identify. Continuity, on the other hand, that's where people tend to slip up. So pay attention to that. All right, without further ado, let's talk about the Safavid Empire. All right, the Safavid Empire, our second of the Gunpowder Empires, it is going to be an Iranian kingdom or a Persian kingdom. For our context, these mean the same thing. The modern-day country of Iran used to be called Persia. So yes, we are going to look at a Persian kingdom founded by this man with the red hair, Ismail Safavi. And Safavi is going to establish a powerful ruling dynasty, the Safavid dynasty. And of course, they are going to be the rulers of the Safavid Empire. They have a lot of absolute power. They are the Shahs of the Safavid Empire. And the Shah, if you remember from Unit 0, is a Persian king. So the Safavids, much like other empires, are going to kind of build their legacy on an earlier empire, in this case, the Persian Empire. So yes, we have the Safavid family founded by Ismail Safavi right here. And much like the other Gunpowder Empires, we initially have Central Asian nomadic heritage for the Safavids. They are initially Central Asian Turks that settled down in the area of Persia, in the area of modern-day Iran, and they do establish a powerful ruling dynasty under this Shia family. And that's what makes the Safavids different from, say, the Ottomans and the Mughals, is that the Safavids are mostly going to be Shia Muslims. They are mostly going to practice Shia Islam. So remember, there are 2 big branches in Islam. There's the Shia, which is the minority. Only a few, 15% of the world's population roughly practices Shia Islam, whereas the majority is Sunni Islam. So Sunni Islam is most widely practiced around the world, but kind of something that is a continuity is that Shia Islam tends to kind of be practiced in the region of Persia specifically. So the Safavids are going to continue that practice of Shia Islam in the region of Persia. Another continuity you could talk about, is the idea of a political and religious split between Sunni and Shia Islam, as we're going to see later on today. So remember, one of the things that made the Ottoman Empire unique is its Sunni caliphate status. Remember, a caliph, the successor to Muhammad, that's the whole reason why Sunnis and Shias split all the way back in the 600s. Who is going to be the rightful, successor of Muhammad? Is it the guy chosen by the intellectuals of the Islamic community, the ulama, by the ummah, by these kind of religious figures? Or is it the blood relative or somewhat related descendant of Muhammad? That's what Shias believe. So we do see that there is this political difference, this religious difference as well. Specifically, the Safavid Empire practices a branch of Shia Islam called Twelverism or Twelver Shiism, or Twelver Shia Islam. Shiism and Shia Islam, they mean the same thing. Twelverism believes essentially that there are 12 prophets that need to kind of come about before the end of the world. There's a final Messiah prophet sort of figure. So yes, the Safavids are going to be kind of this specific branch of Shiaism. And part of that is going to be kind of a religious zeal to spread Shia Islam. They are going to spread Shia Islam as they expand their territorial borders. So we do see kind of that there is this drive for territorial expansion to gain legitimacy. There, again, another characteristic of absolutism. We do see that the Safavids will be successful in converting a lot of population in Central Asia to Shiism, or, well, not completely a lot, but there is significant effort to convert, to send missionaries, Sufi missionaries out to convert people to Shiism. However, this does come at a political kind of cost, that we do see there will be conflict between the Shia Safavids and the Sunni Ottomans, especially. We do see kind of one of the hallmarks of the early modern period within the Middle East, I should say, between the Safavids and Ottomans, is a lot of fighting. We see a lot of Ottoman-Safavid wars. That's Ottoman-Safavid wars. And one such kind of war is going to result in a battle that is fairly decisive in world history, and that's going to be the Battle of Chaldiran. Chaldiran is going to be an Ottoman victory against the Shia Safavids. And this specific battle is significant because it is going to, one, prevent the westward expansion of the Safavid Empire and thus Shia Islam. But for another thing, it is going to kind of be a hallmark, a representation of one of the reasons why overland trade is going to decline. One of the reasons why overland trade in Eurasia is going to decline in the period between 1450 and 1750 is regional conflict between powers like the Ottomans and the Safavids. We'll explore this idea of decline in overland trade more in Unit 4, but it is something worth noting. All right. So we talked about kind of the origins of the Safavid Empire. We talked about a little bit the Shia Muslim identity of the Safavid dynasty, but how are the Safavids an example of a absolutist state? Well, I think the best figure, well, I don't think, I kind of know. One of the best figures to demonstrate this idea of absolutism in the context of the Safavid Empire is this man with the great mustache. I'm not referring to myself, by the way. This man with the mustache right here, Abbas the Great. So who is Abbas the Great? Well, or Abbas the First. There's another Abbas in world history. He's from Egypt. It's not the same guy. Persia is not Egypt. Quick geography lesson right there. But who is Abbas the Great, and why is he an example of an absolute monarch? Well, remember, we call the absolute monarchs in the Safavid empires Shahs, for one thing. But he's a good example for a few reasons. For one thing, we do see that Abbas the Great is very much involved in, you guessed it, the funding of monumental architecture, of culture and art. And remember, a big theme in Unit 3 is that rulers tend to legitimize their rule and show off their wealth and power through the building of monumental art and architecture. And one such example of this elaborate monumental art and architecture is going to be the building of this mosque right here, of Shah Mosque. Shah Mosque, you can guess who helped bankroll the funding of this mosque right here, was the Shah himself. It is a demonstration of wealth and power. Look at this blue tile right here. And we'll explore the Shah Mosque more in just a second, but it is a demonstration of that absolutist idea, as the Australians would say, an absolutist idea of demonstrating wealth and power through monumental architecture. If I say that phrase one more time, I might explode, quite frankly. Abbas the Great is also an example of kind of how rulers use elaborate ceremonies to also center culture around themselves, you could say. So we do see that there is elaborate ceremonies and rituals associated with the Shahs, and all of this is kind of being started under our boy Abbas right here. For example, there's this elaborate parade ceremony of going to the mosque, and that involves kind of who is the center of attention. It's going to be the Sultan, the Shah himself, I should say, the Shah himself. And we do kind of see that nobles kind of line up to participate in these elaborate ceremonies, because if they participate, they get, titles. They get titles of nobility. So it is very similar to, say, Louis XIV. Louis XIV, remember, also had these elaborate ceremonies of waking up and having your kids clap at you, or whatever that one movie showed. So we do see elaborate ceremonial life for these court rituals, for these absolute shahs, these absolute monarchs in the Safavid Empire. So politically speaking, I guess that was also politically speaking, but in terms of more kind of government structure, Abbas is also going to introduce a complex bureaucracy. And a bureaucracy, just one more time, because it's a word that always pops up in our class, isn't it? It is kind of describing the government, or what makes government run, basically. It describes all those little government functions, like who is in charge of collecting taxes, who's in charge of collecting the census, who's in charge of making sure communication gets to places on time. So it involves kind of all these different government functions. That's what the bureaucracy is. It describes all these different government functions, things like taxation, census taking, etc. We do generally see centralization, meaning the power of the nobility is declining in the Safavid Empire, much like in other societies. But we also see the use of a professionalized military. We see the use of a military that is using gunpowder, for one thing, but is also loyal to the Sultan and gets their payment from the Sultan himself. This professionalized military actually is similar to, say, our boys in the Ottoman Empire, the Janissaries. Remember, the Janissaries were the guys who essentially were kidnapped from their little Christian Balkan villages and put into the Ottoman military. Well, we see a similar professionalized military under the Safavids with Abbas the Great. There's a story I cannot remember about Abbas the Great. It's like his son or something. It's either his son or his dad got his eyes stabbed by somebody. I can't remember. Yeah, kind of a crazy upbringing for the young Abbas. No, okay, his dad was killed or something, and then his uncle. Anyway, you wouldn't need to know that for the AP or for the for our test anyway. All right, so examples of absolutism that we got right here. Powerful ruling family, the Safavi family. We've got the funding of art and architecture to demonstrate wealth and power. A demonstration of that, an example of that, you could say, because Mr. Ancharsky loves examples, is the Shah Mosque right here, depicted in the image. The use of ceremonial court life, complex bureaucracy, professionalized military, etc. In terms of culture and the economy, it is valuable to look at that a little bit, because we do see that the Safavid Empire's culture is largely going to kind of surround Shia Islam or Shiism. So we do see that a lot of cultural works, much like these elaborate mosques, these elaborate shrines to various Shia saints, that these are going to be, of course, centered around the primary religion of the Safavid Empire, Shia Islam. In terms of kind of other religions, there are other religions. They do exist, and they do kind of practice within the Safavid Empire. I think the biggest kind of minority, other than Muslims, like Sunni Muslims, is going to be Christians, Armenian Christians especially. However, there is kind of this expectation that the religion of the country is Shia Islam, and a majority of people in the Safavid Empire are Shia Muslims. So kind of there is this expectation of religious conformity, even though other various religions exist, Christians included. But kind of that idea of where is this power being demonstrated in terms of culture, it's being demonstrated in the capital city, much like we saw in the Ottoman Empire. And that capital city is a city known as Isfahan. It's very similar looking to Istanbul, isn't it? So Isfahan is going to be not only the kind of political center of the empire, but it's also the spot where we see elaborate art and architecture being created. We see mosques and palaces and shrines, all these different demonstrations of how much wealth and influence the Safavid rulers have. Isfahan is similar to, say, Istanbul because both are cultural and political centers, but they're different insofar as Istanbul is a lot more diverse in terms of its religious ethnic makeup. We have Christians and Jews and Muslims and etc., Bosnians and etc. All right. Well, in terms of kind of social relations, something that is, you could say, a continuity with earlier Islamic societies, something that is similar to, say, the Ottomans, is going to be the use of a harem. A harem, remember, kind of the collection of wives, of concubines to the central leader, to the Shah in this case. And much like the Ottoman Empire, these women did have a degree of political influence. They could advise their husbands, their male partner, their partner, to kind of choose out amongst their many sons and daughters who their successor should be. And mostly it's going to be sons, by the way. Women could own property in the Safavid Empire, actually. They could own property. They could sell it, like real estate. There is a degree of economic influence for women in the Safavid Empire. In terms of the economy, well, much of the economy is going to be based on trade, actually. Trade and manufacturing of textiles, especially rugs and carpets. I don't rightly know what the difference is between a rug and a carpet, but they are going to primarily be one of the big exporters of the Safavid Empire. The world wants rugs and carpets. It's really cold at night, so they want rugs and carpets. But we do kind of see that this is something that will form the basis of the Safavid economy. They are trading along these overland trade routes. But as we're going to see later on, changes in the global economy are especially going to impact land-based empires like the Safavids, like the Ottomans, like the Mughals, and the Qing dynasty as well in China. And we'll talk about that more in just a second. But I want to show you some pictures of art and architecture, mostly just about that one specific mosque. Because you are kind of expected for the AP exam to have like a very cursory or very basic understanding of what exactly Islamic architecture is. And this is what Islamic architecture is. This is a good example of a variety of different architectural uses. So you could say that this is a continuity, actually, in how we construct, or how Islamic societies construct their houses of worship, their mosques. Because oftentimes a mosque has a minaret, and this is what a minaret is. Look at my mouse. If you can't see that, I'll annotate. But the minaret essentially is that tower structure you kind of see right here. Yeah, this is a minaret right here. A minaret is where the call to prayer happens. Remember, Muslims are expected to pray a certain amount of times each day. For Shia Muslims, I believe that number is 3. But we do see that there are kind of these architectural features, this minaret right here. We see the use of an arch. We see the use of domes and such. As we're going to see in a second, we also have these elaborate blue tiles as well. This is kind of a demonstration of the manufacturing kind of ceramics manufacturing in the Safavid Empire. It's very blue. It's very blue indeed. But it does, again, demonstrate that wealth and power. Blue is one of those harder colors to get in nature, evidently. I'm not a geologist or a mineralogist, but it's, rare to find. So the use of kind of this elaborate blue to demonstrate wealth and power, that connects to our political idea, but it's also kind of a feature, especially in Persian architecture. Yeah, this is a closer image of these tiles specifically. And as you might notice, not a lot of images on this architecture and this artistic style, mostly going to be the use of geometric shapes, but also calligraphy. This is calligraphy right here. These are Quranic statements. I don't know if they're in Arabic or not, but they are in Arab script at the very least. They might be in Persian using Arabic script. But we do kind of have Quran verses, sayings of the Prophet Muhammad from the holy book of the Quran. All right, well, let's say goodbye to the Safavids. As quickly as they came, we must say goodbye to them. And that's the downside of world, I feel. Kind of you have to be so brief about all these different civilizations. But why are the Safavids going to decline? And I believe in a future worksheet question, I ask you, what are some similar factors for how the Gunpowder Empires declined? So pay attention to what is similar to, say, the Ottomans or the Mughal Empire, as we'll talk about later. Well, one of the big economic problems of the Safavid Empire is the fact that, well, there are a lot of economic problems that weaken the kind of cultural and political response to outside changes. For one thing, the Safavid Empire, being a part of the international global community, being a part of the international commerce, kind of, I almost said commerce trade, that would have been a redundancy right there, involved in international commerce, we do see that there are trends that will impact worldwide economies. For example, we do see that one of the big trends in the 1500s is the fact that Spain and Portugal, these places are going to heavily purchase things from Asian markets like the Safavid, like the Chinese areas, with silver. Silver is a highly demanded commodity, except it's perhaps demanded too much because there is an oversupply of silver that's going to bring down the price of silver. And a lot of these economies in the Middle East and these gunpowder empires, their currency is based on silver. So if silver's value decreases, so too does the worth of a coin from any of these gunpowder empires. So silver inflation is a big deal in the Safavid Empire, unfortunately. And that is going to be a sign of economic weakness. But another kind of more pressing issue is the fact that global trends are shifting away from Asia in many ways. Obviously, trade is still a big deal, but manufacturing, it's going to kind of go towards the West. We do see that East Asia, that the Middle East, by the 1700s, they're going to decline as the major manufacturing center of the world. And we do see that Europe, especially Europe after the Industrial Revolution, is going to come and dominate the textile industry. Europe and its factories by the 1700s can produce textiles a lot quicker, a lot cheaper than the fancy rugs and carpets that were sold from the Safavid Empire. So without this major resource, guess what? That's what the Safavid economy is. I blew a raspberry. Anyway, kind of more immediate reason, they're going to be invaded by Central Asian nomads, by groups from modern-day Afghanistan. They're going to invade Isfahan, but they're unable, the Safavids, to respond to this outside threat because of this weakened economy, because of this weakened political system that cannot support a large enough military. But again, kind of a big trend that we're going to see throughout this period between 1450 and 1750 is that overland trade is beginning to decline. It's not completely gone, but it's beginning to decline. And that's mostly because overseas trade is on the rise. Overseas trade, especially because Europe has access to, say, maritime technology like improved sailing ships, they're going to be involved, Europeans that is, going to be involved in Indian Ocean trade, in Atlantic Ocean trade. So we do see that kind of the economic shift in international commerce is going away from overland trade, which is the primary kind of economic forum for, say, the Safavids or the Ottomans. And that's going to impact that general trend of overseas trade increasing is going to impact land-based empires, unfortunately. That's the Safavid flag right there. I think it's kind of funny because the guy is holding up a fist bump almost. So you should be able to answer these questions right here, especially comparing to this general theme of Unit 3, how do rulers expand and justify their power or whatever that unit objective is. So how does the Safavid Empire demonstrate characteristics of absolutism, and how is the Safavid Empire a gunpowder empire? That's a really easy one. Please, please, please do not just put they used gunpowder. That's so... A fifth grader could do that, guys. Come on. We're in a college class. Anyway, well, kind of. you're in an introductory college class that could get you college credit if you do well on the AP exam. I don't think a lot of people realize that. This isn't like shelling out for the AP exam, but something to keep in mind. I actually entered college a sophomore because of the credits I got on my various AP exams. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. Instead of boasting about my AP scores, we've got to talk about the Mughal Empire. And who are the Mughals? Well, that's what we're going to find out. We'll actually return to talking about the Mughals later on in Unit 6 when we start talking about European imperialism in Asia and Africa. But let's introduce who they are, and then we'll talk about kind of why they declined. So who are the Mughals? Well, the Mughals are our last of the three gunpowder empires. You can guess already one of the reasons why they are able to expand is the use of gunpowder. But let's take a look at some of the other aspects of their society. For one thing, the Mughals are going to kind of be an offshoot of the Timurid Empire. The Timurid Empire, remember, was one of those states that emerged following the legacy of Genghis Khan, our boy from Mongolia, and specifically kind of the guy that will found the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire in India is Babur. Babur is this gentleman in the hat reading this book right here. I know he's reading it the right way, but I think it's funny to think that he's reading it and he's not reading the book right. Anyway, so this is Babur right here. Babur is the leader of the Timurid Empire. But as we're going to see in a second, he is going to be the one who will eventually invade northern India, and his descendants are going to be the Mughal emperors, the Muslim rulers of the Indian subcontinent. But in line with that idea of how these different gunpowder empires had Central Asian nomadic heritage, well, it's important to realize that Babur was a descendant of earlier kind of conquerors from Central Asia, guys like Genghis Khan, guys like Timur, the founder of the Timurid Empire. So that's kind of a big other aspect of absolutism in many ways, is that there is a lot of calling back to the past, especially these big old empires like Rome in the case of European and the Ottomans, and the Central Asian societies like the Mongols for the Mughals. So yes, they use gunpowder. I think that's really obvious. Excuse me, I burped right there. That was really gross. Anyway, so let's look at kind of what the Mughals are getting themselves into before we talk about the invasion itself. And this is mostly just to kind of remind ourselves what India was like, and we're going to see what changes in just a second. But remember that India is extremely geographically and religiously diverse. It's geographically, politically, religiously, ethnically, linguistically, all the icklies. It's very diverse, basically. And part of that kind of result of this diversity is that it's difficult to establish a centralized rule over all of the Indian subcontinent. The last time we saw that basically was the Maharyan Empire, but that was way back in Unit 1. Geez, Louise. But much of India is going to be ruled over by local nobles. We mostly do kind of see these local nobles. They rule over small territories, called Rajas. And what is a Raj? Well, essentially, it's a small kingdom. That's kind of a way to think about it. And who rules over a Raj? Well, the answer might surprise you. It is a Raj. So we do see that India is divided between different smaller political entities. There is an extreme amount of decentralization all across India. And decentralization, politically, you could argue, is the result of all of these different diversities, these ideas of differences in language, differences in ethnicity, differences in religion, differences in a variety of different factors. Obviously, diversity is a good thing. I'm not saying that against all of that, but it is kind of it is something to understand about India, at least generally in world history. The biggest kind of power on the Indian subcontinent is the Delhi Sultanate. The Delhi Sultanate was a major Islamic sultanate. A sultanate is always going to be a Muslim empire, just, for your own edification. But it is going to be a big, old Islamic society centered in the city of Delhi, as you might know. But the Delhi Sultanate does kind of have a political rivalry with the Timurid Empire. Both of these empires are largely Muslim societies that are competing for regional influence. So eventually, by the 1500s, by the 1520s to be exact, we do see that Babur is going to gang up against the Delhi Sultanate. He actually gets allies with other Muslim groups, and he is going to invade this area of northern India and establish himself kind of as a continuity with the former Delhi Sultanate. And he's going to be the founder of the Mughal Empire. Eventually, kind of the future Mughal emperors, they're going to lose their claim. They're going to give up their claim to Central Asia and just focus on the Indian subcontinent, kind of in many ways assimilating into Indian society, kind of adopting a lot of Indian practices to a degree, not exactly all that much, but in terms of art, in terms of kind of styling themselves as rulers of India. All right, so we're going to look at the political structure of the Mughal Empire in just a second, but it is important to kind of get this sense that compared to the Ottomans, compared to the Safavids, the Mughal Empire is more decentralized. It's less centralized, I should say. That's not to say it isn't an absolute monarchy. It does have some characteristics of it, as we'll see. There is a powerful ruling family. There is a professionalized gunpowder-based military. There is, we'll talk about the religious aspect in just a second, but it is an absolute monarchy, just, as a blanket statement. But there are some elements that do kind of seem a bit more decentralized, especially through how much power is given to local nobles known as the zamindars. And who are the zamindars? Well, the zamindars are kind of going to be these local former warrior lords who will make up the bureaucracy, the government structure of the Mughal emperor. They're in charge of collecting taxes, especially the zamindars. And in exchange for this kind of government responsibility and for their loyalty, the zamindars are able to own, well, they have essentially their own degree of independence, of autonomy in their various bases of regional support. So a lot of political power is delegated, you could say, to the zamindars. And zamindars could be both Muslim or Hindu, and that's actually something that we'll talk about in just a second. But kind of it is a something to consider when we're thinking about what will cause the decline of the Mughal Empire. A lot of power is given to these local nobles, these zamindars, and this is a zamindar, I believe, from the 1700s right here, and I believe he is Hindu, but do not quote me on that. I better not see any quotes about that. Anyway, in terms of the economy, well, much like the other gunpowder empires, the good old boys in the Mughal Empire, the good old guys and gals in the Mughal Empire, are going to be heavily involved in international trade. Although, unlike, say, the Ottomans and the, what are they called? The Safavids, the Mughals are a bit more kind of involved in overseas trade. They don't have a navy, as we'll talk about in a second, but they do have a significant economic influence in the Indian Ocean community, understandably. It's a place that produces luxurious raw materials, things like textile. Well, I guess textiles aren't raw materials, but cotton is. Things like tea and spices and opium, as we'll explore more in the future. Oh, that's a weird piece of mail. Anyway, so we do see that India, the Indian subcontinent, is very, very, very wealthy. Under the reign of a guy named Aurangzeb, who we'll talk about later, India actually controls like 25% of the world's economy. Doesn't control 25%, but its GDP is 25% of the world's economy. It's absolutely outrageous how wealthy this society is. And yet, we do see kind of something in regards to the government's relationship to trade that might bite it in the butt later on down the road, as we'll talk about later. Because we do see little kind of government supervision over trade. And if you're, a free trade sort of person, then that's a good thing, I guess. But considering the fact that there is limited what we call protectionism for these Indian merchants, we do see that kind of other powers they're going to exert their influence a lot more easily because there is little government supervision over trading. And we are going to see eventually kind of participation on the Indian subcontinent of European groups. We will talk about this more later down the line and in this video, but also in the future. But we do kind of see that this kind of lack of government control or regulation of trade does allow for the possibility for European powers to, or European companies, I should say, to buy up territory within India and exert their own political and economic influence. We'll talk about that more towards the end of this presentation. And I'll define what a merchant enclave is later on down the line. But the big theme, as promised, of this particular chapter, what the topic, the lesson objective is the idea of religion and religious unity and disunity in the Mughal Empire. So we're going to look at the idea of religion in the Mughal Empire, specifically this idea of how do societies either tolerate or not tolerate religion to centralize their control. Because generally, people tolerate religion to keep the peace in a multi-religious society. You don't want people always fighting each other because one group doesn't get the same rights as the other group. But sometimes you see that governments are going to say, screw that. I'm going to establish religious unity. But let's take a look kind of how the Mughal empires will reconcile the fact that they are going to rule over one of the most religiously diverse places in the world. And there is going to be a little bit of tension between a mostly Muslim ruling family, a mostly Muslim ruling government, over these subjects who are mostly not Muslim, over a mixture of different religious, dharmic religious groups like Hindus and Jains and Buddhists, etc. And there are some differences between Hinduism and Islam that you might have picked up on earlier. For example, Islam is a strictly monotheistic religion. There is no God but Allah. And Hinduism, while Hinduism is extremely varied because of its diversity, generally kind of doesn't believe in that. We do see the practice of polytheism in many Hindu societies, in many Hindu kind of denominations, you could say. There's other examples. Islam doesn't have the caste system. Hinduism does. There's that difference. Women, well, that's pretty much the same for everybody, I guess. But there are some differences in practice and in customs between Hindus and Muslims. That's obviously true today. So there's a continuity right there. Anyway, however, there are going to be attempts to overcome these religious differences. So we're going to take a look at religious tolerance. We're going to see that that is a practice utilized by the Mughals to try and establish peace within their multi-religious society. And the best figure to talk about in terms of religious tolerance on the Indian subcontinent is this handsome man right here, Akbar. Not to be confused with Admiral Akbar, because there is no navy in the Mughal Empire. Little Star Wars joke for you. Anyway, Akbar, who is he? Well, he was the third sultan of the Mughal Empire, and he is going to be very active in trying to reconcile the differences between Hinduism and Islam by essentially saying, let's live in peace, guys and gals. Let's have religious tolerance. So that right there is a continuity in many Islamic societies, the idea of religious tolerance. We could go back to the Abbasid Caliphate, for example, for that. But something that is unique about Akbar and the Mughal Empire's religious tolerance is that, say, unlike the Ottomans, Hindus don't have to pay a special jizya tax like they do in earlier Islamic societies. So religious tolerance without any financial qualifications, that's a big deal, quite frankly. Akbar is also going to establish himself as an open-minded sort of guy. He is going to marry into a prominent Hindu family, a prominent Hindu noble family. So it's showing that he is going to literally kind of bridge these gaps by going accepting a Hindu wife into his harem. I believe he had multiple wives. Don't quote me on that, but at least one of them was a Hindu princess. That's pretty cool. He's also going to kind of respect the religious authority of different legal systems. He is going to kind of establish a dual legal system in India. He's essentially going to have kind of a legal court system for Muslims. So for the Muslim community, any cases between Muslims, that's going to be tried by a Muslim judge. So it's seen as more fair than, say, having some person from a different religion judging over you, because that's going to be the case for Hindus, actually. We do see that Hindus, they also have their own legal system. Any case between Hindus is decided on by a Hindu judge. And that's seen as fair because both of these kind of communities, they can rule by their own set of laws. There's kind of two legal codes, you could say, one for Muslims, one for Hindus. Any dispute between Hindus and Muslims, that would kind of be decided on by the Mughal government. But for the most part, it is a way to keep the peace. Akbar also basically tries to create like a state religion that blends Hinduism and Islam together. It doesn't really go anywhere, but it's an attempt. We also see that Akbar is going to be pretty active in promoting syncretism culturally between Hindus and Muslims. He is going to be a big patron of the arts. And this kind of patronage of architecture and the arts is to demonstrate he's willing to kind of blend these two different cultures and religions together to make something new and unique that represents Mughal identity, you could say. So he is a big patron of artistic syncretism. And we'll look at some examples of syncretism in just a second. You might be familiar with the most famous, the Taj Mahal. Akbar is going to also kind of make sure that his Muslim base is still supporting him. He is going to make a lot of reforms. For example, he's going to get rid of things that are kind of viewed as too offensive, you could say, for Muslims. For example, kind of that practice of wife burning is going to be decreased. That's a cool picture on the screen over there. All right. So we do kind of see that there are some reforms to kind of promote peace between Muslims and Hindus. You wouldn't really need to know specifics. Kind of, I gave you the good ones for Akbar right there. In terms of syncretism, well, this is kind of another way where we see the Mughals trying to tolerate different religious traditions, different cultural traditions. We do see that a lot of the art and architectural features funded by the Mughals is going to encourage a blending of Hindu and Persian, i.e. Islamic, styles of art. So this is a way to kind of bridge the gap culturally between the ruling Muslim elite and everybody else down below them, Hindus. Obviously, Hindus aren't completely below because there are, Hindu zamindars, so Hindus in government. But we do see kind of that the blending of different cultures is a way to showcase, hey, we're cool with everybody. And the best example of an example of this idea of syncretism is the Taj Mahal, and I'll show some pictures of that in a second. You definitely have seen it if you've ever looked into India at all. It's a very famous example. So we've looked at kind of official ways of bridging the gap, you could say, between Islam and Hinduism. But what about everyday people? What about kind of everyday people living in the kind of borderland between Hinduism and Islam? Well, actually, we will see a popular movement emerge, a movement that appeals especially to members of the lower caste, lower class people, and those that, are seeing these two great religions and kind of want a little bit of both. And that is going to be, the best example is Sikhism. Sikhism, just for your world history knowledge, is probably one of the best examples of religious syncretism because it is going to almost explicitly combine elements of both Islam and Hinduism. Sikhism, we'll talk about more in just a second. I'll show a chart of kind of the differences between these religions and the how Sikhism kind of blends together Islam and Hinduism. But it is going to kind of have elements of both in its religious teachings. It's founded and primarily taught by this man right here, Guru Nanak. He's going to be the first of a series of gurus, the religious leaders of Sikhism. And I'll show kind of some pictures and, or not pictures, but a chart in a second to demonstrate this idea of syncretism. And sorry. And of course, I'll talk about mausoleums and minarets in just a second. But Sikhism is an example of kind of how everyday people, not necessarily the government of Mughal India, are trying to overcome boundaries between Muslims and Hindus. So this is one example of artistic syncretism. We've got the arches, we've got the domes, we've got these little kind of spiky things. I guess they're trying to emulate the minaret in many ways. But it is going to kind of have also this bell-shaped dome as well. This is a feature of Indian architecture, this horizontalness of the structure of, I believe this is either a palace or a mausoleum, a fancy tomb. I cannot recall off the top of my head. But this building right here, it is an example of this blending of Hindu and Islamic architecture. But the most famous example of Mughal architecture, of Mughal syncretic architecture, is, of course, the Taj Mahal. And the Taj Mahal has got a lot of things going for it in terms of syncretism. We've got these minarets right here. These are towers, Islamic-inspired towers. We've got this arch. We've got the domes from Islamic architectural practices. From Hinduism, we've got this kind of octagonal shape. We've got this horizontal shape. We've got this kind of dome feature, these mini domes right here. We've got this very unique kind of archway structure that isn't as pointy as, say, the Islamic one. Ah, yes, this is the best example right here of the idea of syncretism. I want to go to India, come to think of it. That's on my bucket list. Turkey and India, and Iran maybe, but we'll see. And then in terms of kind of religious syncretism, going back to Sikhism, well, let's see how Sikhism is a blending of the two. Well, for one thing, guess what? Sikhism, monotheistic. Oftentimes they utilize kind of this Allah phraseology. They reference the singular God of Allah. Religious equality, meaning that there's no caste system. But Sikhism is considered a dharmic religion, meaning it does believe in ideas of reincarnation, of karma, etc. All right, so I was about to say talk to your neighbor. I'm in school mode right now. How did the Mughals handle religious diversity on the Indian subcontinent? Now we're going to look at decline. What is making the Mughal Empire decline? Well, one of the factors actually is going to be a kind of a reversal of that earlier practice of religious tolerance, because future emperors, at least under this specific ruler that I'm going to talk about with the eagle, or the falcon, I should say right here, are going to try and solidify their political power by establishing religious conformity, or at least attempting to. And the figure we most associate with this is Aurangzeb. And historians are kind of divided over Aurangzeb. Was he truly kind of a sort of a bigot, as we would call him? No, or well, who knows exactly what his motivations were. But some have made the claim that Aurangzeb is an example of religious intolerance as it comes, or excuse me, as it relates to the his policies, and we'll talk about them in just a second. But what is Aurangzeb going to do? Well, something that historians don't really debate on is that he was more Islamically driven than previous Mughal emperors. He was very much focused on Islamic orthodoxy. He was a big supporter of trying to introduce more Islamic elements to Mughal society. And he did want to create religious unity in the empire, but this desire to create religious unity is going to come at the cost of politically and religiously dividing the great country, the great nation, the great empire, I should say. For one thing, Aurangzeb is going to reintroduce the jizya tax. He's going to tax non-Muslims, especially Hindus. Nobody likes paying taxes. But he's also going to persecute Sikh groups as well. Sikhs are going to come under persecution. And they actually do develop a bit of a militaristic culture surrounding their society, surrounding their religious practices. And this is mostly kind of a reflection of this persecution under Mughal emperors. Sikhs are non-traditional Muslims, or well, they're not Muslims. They're practicing kind of a non-traditional religion. It's neither Hinduism nor is it Islam. So it is going to face kind of public I don't want to say scrutiny, but it is going to have persecution against Sikhs. But Aurangzeb is also going to kind of be divisive in a way because he is going to invade the unconquered parts of India, which is mostly going to be politically unified under a Hindu confederacy called the Maratha Confederacy. And we do see a series of almost religiously inspired wars. Some of the language used by the Mughals is somewhat related to the idea of jihad, this idea of a holy war to spread Islam. And that is going to cause a lot of disunity within the Mughal Empire. Hindus are feeling, hey, we have no place in this society. Muslims are trying to kind of establish their control over this multi-religious society. Aurangzeb, he looks cool in my opinion. He's got a cool beard. And he's also got a cool falcon. If only he didn't tax Hindus. Who knows? But there are other factors for the decline. And by the way, kind of this religious intolerance, why does that lead to decline? Well, what do you think? Well, it kind of leads to decline because of this political disunity. There is going to be kind of disunity among Hindus and Muslims, and that's going to kind of lead to alienation of both sides to the Mughal government. They're not doing enough to promote my religion, essentially. Other factors include the fact that the government was just not able to sponsor this massive expansion. India is a huge place, so it's very expensive to maintain control over such a wide empire, especially if they're looking to expand into the south. And actually, those Maratha Mughal wars actually cost a lot of money in maintaining, so we do see kind of government expenses and not enough revenue. And why don't we see enough revenue? It's because those zamindars are corrupt as heck, my friend. These zamindars are given the kind of power to tax probably a little too much. They begin taking off the side, or skimming off the top, I should say. So corruption in this bureaucracy, also a cause of decline, you could say. Not enough money going to where it's needed to maintain the empire. But when we're thinking about world history and the connection with other societies, you can also make the argument that the intrusion of European powers, slowly taking up that economic wealth of the Mughals, is also a factor of decline. And Europeans are kind of able to come into India because of the fact that the Mughals don't have a navy. They are kind of already fairly decentralized in their political structure. So we do see that European traders are beginning to kind of take power away from Mughals. They begin buying up regions called merchant enclaves. These are enclaves or little pieces of territory, essentially, that are within the Mughal Empire, but they're not ruled over by the Mughals. They're ruled over by the laws of the mother country. They're essentially kind of mini merchant colonies, and they are subject to their own laws rather than the laws of Mughal society. We also see that the Europeans are also kind of bribing zamindars to collect taxes for them instead of the Mughal emperors. And we see that especially with powerful trading companies like the British East India Company. And we'll talk about them a lot more in Unit 6 and how they basically rule over India and take all the taxes for a private company. Admittedly, it's backed by the British government, but it's absolutely insane, the British East India Company, as we'll explore later on. But it's not just the British. There are other European powers also interested in India. There's the French, there's the British, there's the Portuguese, there's the Dutch. They're also buying up land in India and taking away kind of key economic centers from the Mughals. All right. So you should be able to identify similarities and differences, well, mostly similarities, between how the Gunpowder Empires declined. Think about the role of Europe. Think about kind of the role economic factors played into it. And then finally, this is something we will discuss more in Unit 4, but I want to introduce it now just to wrap up today's presentation. All right, so we're going to look at some continuity and change in the Islamic trading systems in the ocean-based systems of the world. So in terms of continuities, we still see that there is Muslim participation in the Indian Ocean trade. We still see the spread of Islam because of the involvement of Islamic societies. Sufis are still spread in Islam. Sufi's got a Sufi. We still see the spread of Islam into island places, into places like Indonesia. Indonesia actually today has the largest Islamic population in the world by kind of population size. And yet we also do see that there are tensions between orthodox and unorthodox practices in Islam. And orthodox with a small o, that means kind of traditional, basically, versus non-traditional Islam. Traditional Islam tends to be practiced by the different sultans of these societies, the ruling elite, whereas unorthodox Islam, that's more practiced by everyday people, you could say. And it kind of combines elements of local religion, of Hinduism, of Buddhism, etc. Yeah. Oh, I had a thought, but I just forgot it. Anyway, it's not important. I probably would have known if it was important. Okay. Oh, I remember. So untraditional Islam, some of those practices are actually going to be influenced by the introduction of Jesuit missionaries. Catholics are also bringing their religion at this time into the world. So we do see examples of syncretism all over the hecking place. In terms of changes, well, we are going to see participation of Europeans. By the 1450s, Europeans are going to establish those merchant enclaves in key port cities. There are a few kind of colonies, not very many in the same way we will see in Spain, with Spain and Portugal and the English and the French in North and South America. But we do see some kind of port city colonies. We also see some small island colonies, the Dutch being one of the biggest ones, actually. All right, that's the big change, really. All right, so yeah, we will see kind of new European powers becoming involved in the Indian Ocean, especially this place that was formerly almost exclusively dominated by Muslim merchants. At first, it will be the Portuguese until about the 1580s, then it's going to be the Dutch until the 1600s, and then it's going to be our boys in red, the British. All right, so I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I hope you got something out of this. Yeah, whatever. Have a great day. Have a great life. Bye. And